A rental property is not going to solve all your problems. It's probably just going to create more problems. I moved to South America for 3 months and my savings rate shot up to 80%. And I was like, whoa. There's so many different ways that you can make money through real estate. And I really believe that real estate investing is fantastic because we're not reinventing the wheel.
Welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. Today's episode is a special one because we're sitting down with someone who has truly mastered the art of real estate investing on her own terms, Sarah Weaver. Sarah has built a real estate portfolio that allows her to live and travel anywhere in the world, all while continuing to scale her business using the medium-term rental strategy. In this conversation, we're diving into how she built a location-independent real estate business, the strategy behind her high cash flow midterm rentals, and tips and tricks for identifying win-win partnerships to accelerate your real estate investing journey. Let's get into it. All right, welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. Today I have a very special guest. It's Sarah Weaver. Sarah, I've been following you for several years, but this is the first time I had the opportunity to sit across the screen from you. I'm really grateful to have you on the show. And although I'm familiar with your story, I would love for you to just give a quick intro to my audience in your own words.
Oh, well, thank you, Aaron. No, it's nice to be here. I am a real estate investor. I started investing in 2017. At the time, I was working remote as a digital nomad, kind of before digital nomad became a true thing, with the pandemic and so many people moving to remote. For me, travel was always my number one. I looked at my 20s as an opportunity to work really hard, accumulate a lot of skills, but really just tick off a lot of those life experiences that I wanted to have before. It's funny, Aaron, we were talking before we aired about being 35 and this just being like a different chapter. And so I saw my life in chapters. And one of those things that I happened to do was pick up some rental properties. So I invested in the Midwest, which I know we'll talk about at length. And those rental properties really changed my life. I started talking about investing, posting about investing, which is, how you came to follow me. I wrote a book about investing, and now I turn around and I help people like you who have a W-2 job but want to invest in real estate. That's really what my time is dedicated to doing, is helping people invest in real estate.
I love that. Yeah, our timelines are pretty similar too. We're both the same age. I bought my first property in 2017 and similarly invest in a few different markets.
And when you bought that property, did you know it was a rental, or were you house hacking? Because mine, I went in knowing this is a real estate investment property. I definitely knew I wanted to build a portfolio, but it's funny, Aaron, I didn't know at the time what I know now. And so I just thought, if I just buy one every other year for 10 years, I'll own 5 properties and that's good, I guess.
Yeah, that does work, right? And I think there's something to be said for that plan can work if you're going to have a W-2 consistently for multiple decades and diversify and have that be part of your portfolio. That strategy absolutely works. But to answer your question, no, we did not know. The first primary we bought, it was before my wife and I got married. We got married the year after that. And we bought our first intentional rental property in 2019. But that first house we bought in 2017 is a funny little story about it. We got 4 different uses out of it. We bought it and we lived in it for 3 years. Mm-hmm. We used a cash out refi to pull equity out and buy 2 more rental properties with it. Then we moved out of the house and kept it as a rental. And then we eventually sold it before we hit the 5-year capital gains exclusion deadline for the IRS. So we were able to sell it. I think it was $165,000 gain tax-free. Incredible. So this was our kind of beta property, right? Where we learned all these new tricks as we went, but I would be lying if I said that was entirely intentional. We just followed the signals as they appeared.
Yeah, I think that the ability to pivot is really important as a real estate investor and entrepreneur. And yeah, I think a lot of investors, or I should say want to be investors, get so paralyzed because they think they need to know everything. I can't tell you how many new investors who haven't invested yet are yeah, but what about a 1031 exchange? Or how do I buy the 4th one? Won't I run out of funds? And I'm like, Steve, just buy your first one. Let's get your first one done. And then let's talk about all the things that happen after that.
Or how many LLCs should I form?
Oh my gosh, that question. Yeah. I can't even, I made a joke about it and I feel bad. I got asked that question on stage and I made a joke and probably about 30% of the room got the joke because they know that question gets asked all the time. But the poor woman who asked it, I really offended her. And so later I had to go find her like after the conference, in the hallway and be like, "Hey, I did not mean to like, I was not ridiculing you. It was just a joke." But for those of you that don't know the joke, so many investors are like, how should I open an LLC? Do I buy it in an LLC? Everyone is like obsessed with this LLC question. And the funny part is that if you go ask your attorney, they're going to have a different answer. If you go ask another attorney, they're going to have a different answer. And then your CPA has a totally different answer. And then a tenured investor has a different answer. So good luck figuring out the right answer for you. I am not an attorney. I will not advise on that anymore.
Well, and just to like put a bow on this point, right? I think sometimes people mask these types of tasks as it's procrastination from doing the actual work of going out and finding a deal.
Yes.
Right? Find something that's worth protecting, and then you can answer those questions.
Exactly. I call it procrastination through education. So how many people do we know? I mean, we met in a mastermind. How many people do we know that join all these masterminds to get all their questions answered, but really they're just procrastinating and they're scared. And I think it's important that we talk about that fear. So it is scary. Like if your family is relying on you to, head your household and control your finances and you make a bad investment, that can be scary. And so I think we're here to educate people on how to buy a rental property that isn't going to ruin your life.
So there's a lot of threads I want to pull on in this conversation, but I like where this is going. So let's talk about 2017. Maybe let's say the year or two leading up to that. Like what was going on in your head, in your lifestyle, in your professional life that led you to that first property? And then some of the fears that you just talked about were, hey, I have a big chunk of money. I don't want to screw this up, but I know that, I've done enough research to know that real estate is where I want to invest. Like, how did you personally get through some of those barriers in that very, very first deal?
Yeah, I was probably at a very different place than a lot of your listeners. I was making very little money. And I was spending very little money. And so the cool thing is that I didn't know what this was called at the time, but my savings rate was so high. And so I'll give numbers. So I was making $47,000 a year, which I realize now it is common, like when you're in your early 20s. However, I ran around in a really high achieving group of friends. So I know that they were making 80, 100. And I was like, wow, that's so much money. And now I confidently can say I'm making more than that. And it's definitely, it's all perspective because my expenses have also gone up. And so at the time, my savings rate was 40%.
Wow.
And then I moved to South America in 2016 for 3 months. And my savings rate shot up to 80%. And I was like, whoa, I'm onto something. And I think for me at the time, before I bought my first rental property, I looked at money as definitely I had abundance mindset around money. And so I think that that's something I want to mention because I think that that carried me to where I am today is I don't live very many areas of my life in a scarcity mindset. So I looked at my first rental property as, can I flip it? Can I live in it, which is going to be, either I'm going to rent for free or not pay rent, so live for free, or at least have my rent lowered, which at the time already my rent clearly was very low. Can I do a cash out refi? So can I buy something, increase the value through renovation, pull money out? Can I do a HELOC? Like I call that treating your property like an ATM. And so there's so many different ways that you can make money through real estate. And I first educated myself on that. So I don't want to poo-poo on education. That was not what I meant by, procrastination through education. I definitely educated myself on all of the different exit strategies. So I truly had very little fear. It also helped that the house that I bought was $217,000. And my PITI was $1,429. I still remember. And I could rent out each room to roommates for $700. So I was like, sweet, if I get 2 roommates, that's covered. And I pay a third of utilities. And I knew at the time, at least, like, then I have principal pay down. Prices will appreciate. I bought in a really nice neighborhood. And then I forced appreciation by doing renovations. And so I did a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in that first house, which again is probably something that your listeners are like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Like, I have a high paying job. I'm not like, laying vinyl plank flooring and killing my back. But at the time, at 27, that felt like a really good investment of my time. And so fast forward, that same house, my monthly payment has shot up to just shy of 1,600, because of, taxes increasing and insurance increasing. But my rent, I now rent it for 3,100. And then it is appreciated like over $100,000. And I actually conservatively have not pulled anything out of it. So I didn't do a cash out refi. I haven't done a HELOC. So I have all that appreciation sitting in there. So with all that being said, I wasn't scared. When did I become fearful? Probably property number 3 and property number 4. That's when fear really started to sit in.
Why do you think that is?
Think that you have, at that point I bought a couple multifamilies. So then it's like, oh, I own 4 air conditions. If all air conditions crap out this summer, or I own 4 furnaces. So that dollar amount got higher. And then also, instead of having 1429 as a mortgage, principal, interest, taxes, insurance I need to pay, I now have 3 of those. And so I'm up to, let's say, 6K. And so that was a little bit more stressful. Also, I got riskier. So I bought in a city I had never been to. I did a long distance renovation, which means I had to hire a contractor I had never met. And I used hard money and private money with the plans of doing what's called the BRRRR strategy. So I renovated it, wanted to rent it out, refinance, and be able to pull that money out. So that's risky. Is your renovation going to cost more than you think? Is your house going to appraise lower than you anticipated? I definitely was approaching a much riskier strategy.
So there's so many things there that are wonderful for, especially the listeners of this show to hear. The first is, I think that you had a business owner's mentality
Always.
Long before you bought your first property. And so when you talk about how you weren't as afraid heading into that, you were your foundations were very solid. You had a high savings rate in your personal life. So you had kind of control over your personal finances. And then you also premeditated these several different potential exit strategies. You had a really, really rock solid plan. And even though you were doing a lot of the work yourself, which may not be achievable if someone has a full...
And I'm not doing that now. Let's fast forward. I'm doing a full-on renovation currently. I'm not swinging a hammer, you guys. Like, things have changed.
Yeah, no, but I think there's something to be said for kind of learning some of those motions on your own in the beginning. And then when you go to delegate them in the future, or even like you said, hire people from afar, because that's the other thing, out-of-state investors that's the main audience that I typically serve.
Mm-hmm.
Getting over the discomfort of being so far away from your investments, not only your investments, but your teammates, right? It's that feeling of like the lack of oversight or not knowing what's going on. Like, that's the real fear that I encounter with most of the people I talk to.
Yes.
But what I just wanted to point out about your first home, right, is that you had a plan, a very, very solid plan on very solid footing. And I think when people talk about the fear that they get around their first deal, you can arm yourself not just with courses and education and all that, but with an actual like solid business plan. And that de-risks, at least in your own head. And then also when you're talking it out with people that you trust in your network, that's one of the best ways to de-risk. And then the other thing is that you're talking about, as you continue to scale, most people think about the upside of scaling without thinking about the downside. They're like, oh, I can add additional cash flow, but they're not thinking like what you said, where it's like, oh, I have this much mortgage debt. I put out a post a few years ago when we hit our, 8 property. It was like, I'm a debt millionaire now. I have over $1 million in debt now. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that for consciousness, to be aware, and also to show that that's not bad debt. It's backed by pretty solid loan to value, and then also by cash flow. But it is something to be aware of. And I think it's so funny that you said, sorry, last thing I'll say is that I work with a financial advisor who helps me with my stocks and all my non-real estate. And he doesn't come from a real estate background. But when I onboarded with him and I told him I had 8 properties, the first thing he said to me was, that's a lot of appliances, Aaron. And so when you said the AC comment, I just couldn't help but think of that.
Yeah. So for your audience, I didn't mention that I have been fully nomadic for the last 6 years. And so I joke that that's just like a fancy way of saying homeless. And I regrettably have said this multiple times, but I actually own more units than shoes because I quite literally like live out of a carry-on suitcase. And as a girl that does care about what she looks like that's not necessarily a brag. Like I do hope to own more shoes. But what's funny is that I own, 12 couches. I think I own like 15 mattresses now because I own half my portfolio is furnished rentals. And I am finally buying my own primary, so a house that I plan to live in. And you guys, buying a couch was like a huge ordeal. I think I was more emotional about buying this damn couch than I was about anything else that I've bought in the last 8 years. Because one, I'm gonna have to sit on it, right? So I want to like it. But also it feels the permanence of owning a couch feels so real. And it's laughable because I own, 11 furnished rentals. I own 20 rentals overall now. And I own a lot of things, but this feels so different.
It really does. One interesting thing that you're kind of explaining is that you had this abundance mindset around money, but you had this minimalist mindset around how you built your own life, right? You built it to be light and agile and able to
Yes.
relocate quickly. And I say this almost a little bit out of envy because I'm the opposite. I've accumulated stuff. Everywhere I go, I have more stuff, not less. And I always wondered what it would be like to have a light footprint, but it allows you to do things like what you're talking about, which is be location independent, which I know is a goal of a lot of the people that I talk to and that listen to this show. But I
Yeah.
think that was a conscious choice that you made, and you built your life and your portfolio to support that, which is, I think some people call it like lifestyle investing, right? You're building a portfolio to support the life that you want to live versus trying to just kind of wedge it into your existing life without, understanding what it enables, which I think leads to one of the other topics that you literally wrote a book on, which is the midterm rental strategy. And I was telling you before we hit record, as I've run the show for almost 18 months and I have yet to bring someone on to talk about midterm rentals, but it's one of the, most popular kind of trendy ways to get some extra squeeze out of a standard single family home. So at a super high level, maybe you can explain not only what the strategy is, but then how you kind of evolved from the long-term rental into this midterm rental.
Absolutely. So that first property that I mentioned, I did furnish it because I lived in it. And so I had the experience of furnishing something with the avatar guest or tenant in mind. So that first house, I decorated it in a way that it would attract the type of roommates that I wanted, who would eventually become my tenants when I moved out. And so I had that experience. And then also, I mentioned that I went abroad in 2016. One of the things that happened on that trip that I didn't realize at the time would be influential, but I met a lot of travel nurses on that backpacking trip. So I was at a hostel in the north of Colombia, and there were a bunch of girls that were all travel nurses. And so for those of you not familiar, they get usually a 13-week contract at a hospital somewhere else in the US that they don't live, and they go there and they work that contract. And to put numbers to it, the staff nurse at that hospital might make $35 an hour, but they're going to make somewhere close to like $115 an hour. And so what happens at the time is a lot of these travel nurses, they'd take maybe 2, 3, or 4 13-week contracts back to back, and then they'd go backpack South America, backpack Europe, take some time off. And so I remember meeting them and thinking like, wow, that's so cool. So later, when I was a real estate investor, I knew that I wanted to own an Airbnb because I was an Airbnb guest like all over the world. I thought, how cool will it be to own an Airbnb? However, I knew enough real estate investors that manage their own Airbnbs, their short-term rentals, and these 2-night, 3-night stays, needy guests, guest questions, that was not going to work with my lifestyle. Sometimes I'm on a 12-hour flight or I go off grid and I hike Kilimanjaro. Like it was not going to work for me to run a true short-term rental. And that's when I went back and I remembered these travel nurses. And I was like, they told me that they stay in Airbnbs. And so that became my ideal avatar. When I bought my third property, which is a 4-unit in Omaha, Nebraska, I knew that I wanted to turn at least 2 of the 4 units into a furnished rental. Fast forward today, and I own 11 midterm rentals, and about 90% of my guests are travel nurses.
Wow. You know what's so cool is that now that I'm thinking about it, so you did the house hack, which essentially taught you to think about what people might want if they move into a furnished home. And then you thought of it really from also your perspective of like, if I'm sharing space with people, how do I want this place to feel?
Yes.
And then the second thing is like you were traveling and you met travel nurses who they work really, really hard for these sprints, 13 weeks, maybe multiple contracts in a row. And then they like to blow off steam and they also like to have a light footprint.
Yes.
So I think your ability to relate to both of those situations probably sets you up very, very well to then, explore that strategy. Not that you have to have all that parallel experience, but it sounds like it was another example of like organically evolving into a strategy just based on what you were observing. Is that accurate?
Yes, that and just I approached my real estate as a business. So one of the things I want to add is not only was I making, under 50,000, I don't come from money. So I really had no backup plan. I'm single. So like this had to work. And so if any of you listening are like, yeah, I want to invest in real estate, but like it has to work. I'm like, trust me, I feel the same way. Like this had to work. And so I went about each and every investment that I've made with what strategy is going to work for one, and then two, maximize my outcomes. So I want to know how can I, get the most money out of this property? And that's where midterm rentals came in. So to put some numbers to it, 1 bedroom, 1 bath in Omaha might rent long-term for $750. But as a midterm rental, I can get anywhere between $1,800 and $2,200. And so, yes, there's an initial cost of furnishing it. And yes, there's now the cost of maintenance and utilities that may not go along with a long-term rental. But overall, I'm getting way more of a return on my money using the midterm rental strategy without the headache and the time commitment that a short-term rental might bring.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I know it's very market specific, but what you just kind of said with those numbers is that you can get more than twice the amount of revenue from a midterm rental as you can with long-term rental, at least in Omaha. Is that pretty standard for it to be 2x or more? Or are there some markets where it's, 30, 40% more? Like what, is there a standard?
There's not a standard. I'm so sorry for those of you that love rules. Like there really is not a rule to this. And let me be very clear. The midterm rental strategy doesn't always work. So one example is my very first house, the single family that I told you I'm renting for $3,100 as a long-term rental. I'm not paying gas, electric, water, internet, or lawn care or snow removal on that property as a long-term. So you need to add all of those expenses if I were to furnish it. And then you need to add in that you're going to have higher vacancy for a midterm rental. There might be times in between guests where the property's sitting vacant. And you guys, if your property's vacant, you're not making any money. And so in that case, there wasn't enough of a margin between a long-term and a midterm. Once I also added the cost of furnishing a 4-bedroom. Not only the money, like the monetary cost, but my single family home happened to become vacant at a time that it was just going to be really inconvenient for me to furnish. Which brings me to another point. You need to recognize before you launch a midterm rental that you need to design it. You need to curate all the furniture. You have to manage the delivery schedule of all the furniture. You likely need to fly out to the property. You're going to break your back putting things together, or you can hire someone to do that, which is going to have a cost associated with it. It is a good plug that I do own a company where we offer that service, but I think that it's really important that people realize the cost associated with changing your long-term to a midterm. I would say 6 times out of 10, it's worth it. But about 4 times, it's not worth it. And so make sure you analyze the deals. I love the midterm rental strategy. I wrote a book about the midterm rental strategy. And I'm telling you, it's not always the right strategy for every property.
That's a really good point because I think a lot of people hear, oh, great, I can just increase my cash flow if I just flip this switch and all of a sudden start advertising on Furnish Finder and I'll make, 2x money. That's definitely not the case. You have to back out a bunch of expenses that you wouldn't have had to pay as a long-term rental owner. and then, the furnishing, and then all the potential, additional operational complexities. But so I think the majority of the listeners, most likely, have full-time jobs, and the idea of flying to a remote market and setting things up and coordinating delivery schedules and getting things online is probably out of reach. So the second option, right, where you hire a firm to do that, is that a pretty common service in most major markets, like whether it's your company or other companies? And if so, like what could someone expect to pay for that type of service?
Yeah, I think that the fees are really going to depend on like what they offer. So, for example, my company, Aria Design Services, we offer where we'll analyze your property for you. So before you even make the investment into furniture and making the switch, is we'll tell you what it would rent as a long-term, mid-term, or short-term rental so that you can make an educated decision. It would be in my best interest to always tell my clients to turn it into a furnished rental. But I also am a person of morals, and I'm an investor first. So like I always am looking at everything as an investment. And so I would say about 50% of the time we tell people like do it as a long-term rental. That's why I gave, 60% of the time it does make sense to turn it into a midterm, and about 40% it doesn't. So we probably tell every, 1 out of 2 people that it doesn't work. So we analyze it. Then we will curate your design and choose everything that goes into the property. And again, we are investors before we're interior designers. I do have a designer on my team, and she's in charge of choosing everything. And what's fun now is we've done enough that we have probably both touched every item. So like I know that these inexpensive spoons are actually good quality, whereas like this inexpensive nightstand like dissolves after like anyone puts a glass on it, right? Like IKEA dressers just like dissipate over time. So I think that it's important to hire someone who knows what the cost of every item is, and then also where to spend money. So we look at your competition. So like in certain areas, you need to go all out on this type of design. Whereas in other areas, as long as it looks good and clean and like a good design, you could go pretty budget friendly. So for example, we've done about 8 units in Detroit, Michigan for a client, and his budget is very small and his units look great and they're fully occupied because he beats out his competition. So I think that when you're hiring someone at that level, you're going to get all of this. Or you can hire your property manager might even offer to put the furniture together, but you're going to be picking everything. And just the curating of furniture takes about 80 hours. And we're experienced. And if you've never done this before, you might find yourself at like 11 p.m., like debating on what lamp to get. Let me tell you, that is not a good use of your time, you guys. Like, don't do it. And then also I've found this, that sometimes they're like, oh yeah, like I love design, so like this is going to be fun. And it's like, yeah, you love design when your budget's really big. But when the budget is really small, it's not actually all that fun to like choose every piece of furniture. And so that was a very long way of explaining that the cost is going to really depend on the level of services. But we start at consultations, as low as $1,000. We'll consult on your property, all the way up to, on a 3-bed, 2-bath, it might cost $8,000 for us to curate the whole design. That includes us flying out there, putting everything together, but doesn't include the cost of the furniture.
Yeah. Well, so much good stuff there. I think you hit on one thing, which is that a lot of people love the idea of designing their midterm rental. But then in actuality, when they've got their job or they have their other properties in their portfolio or they've got their kids that they got to take wherever they're going to go, in actuality, when you're trying to put it into practice, that idea, the excitement about the idea fades quickly. And then it turns into a pain, and it turns into, oh crap, I bought this property. Now I need to put it into service. And 3 weeks have gone by because I got busy with my life. So
yeah,
I think
the cost of time.
Yes, exactly. And so that's a great point. And we don't have any midterms in our portfolio. My parents run one, and it is by far the most profitable house that they have in their portfolio. And but they learned a lot of that the hard way. Like they did all the furnishing themselves. And I don't think that 80 hours is an exaggeration at all. They put a ton of time into furnishing and getting the right features in each room, figuring out all the, the locks and how the common areas were going to work. It's a lot of thought and energy that you have to put into it. And even it's different than a short-term rental where typically it's one person or one family that's using the space, not a bunch of people sharing the same house, which has its own kind of unique challenges. But thank you
Yeah,
for, go ahead.
I recently heard Chris Sacca talk on Tim Ferriss's podcast. He and his wife were about to do a new build. He's an angel investor. He was on Shark Tank. If you don't know who he is, he's just an incredible serial entrepreneur. And he and his wife were about to do a new build, and they were like 2 weeks into the process, and they looked at each other and they're like, what are we doing? We are about to commit like 2 years of our lives to making 1,000 decisions. And I can tell you, I am currently in the process of renovating a house. And I don't know if you know this, but for those of you that haven't done this, like sure, you pick the countertop, right? So you need to pick what material it's going to be. But then there's a type of edging. Like now I know 7 different types of edging on quartz countertops. I don't need to know that information. Like I am so bogged down by these tiny little decisions. And so I encourage all of you, before you commit to doing things on your own, like really think about the cost of time, because my time has been so sucked up by every little decision that I'm making on this. It's a pretty big renovation. And I don't know if I recommend it for everyone. And keep in mind that I own my own business, so I don't have to go to work or, report to a boss, but I do have a lot of things pulling on my time.
Yeah, and I think it's always, in any context for any person on this planet, it's a good idea to ask yourself, what is the highest and best use of my time right now based on the goals that I have and the lifestyle I want to build? If you ask that question in any context, I think it's a good use of time to at least understand where your priorities are and if what you're doing actually serves those priorities or not. This is a great example of that.
That's why I love the midterm rental strategy for small multifamilies. So for this 4-unit building, I was already paying water for the whole building. I was already paying lawn care and snow removal. And so the additional cost was only the electric and gas and internet on a tiny little 1-bedroom. So that cost increase was so small compared to the single family that I used as an example earlier, whereas I didn't have any cost and I was adding a lot of cost. And so I definitely want people to really consider what's also the best use of that property that you're going to buy. Because I want everyone here, whether you have a really demanding W-2 or no W-2 or whatever your life situation is, I want every investment that you make to be a good use of your time.
And to tie that back to what even the first property you bought, which wasn't a midterm rental, but you had a plan. You treated it like a business owner. You had a business plan. You had thought about what the potential exit strategies might be, and you had a plan financially to make it make sense for you in the context of your life at that time. And I think that's where a lot of people, you can alleviate the anxiety and the fear, is if you just have a plan, as simple as it may sound. But today's episode is brought to you by the Remote Real Estate Academy, the community I launched last year where I personally coach investors and empower them to buy rental properties anywhere in the United States. My business partner Nathan and I have a collective 15 years experience with over 20 cash flowing out-of-state rental properties. We provide a step-by-step playbook on how you can build your own portfolio and start accessing the life-changing benefits of real estate investing starting today. Go to remoterealestateacademy.com for more info, or better yet, shoot me an email at aaron@aaronamin.com with subject line RREA, and I'll throw in a special bonus for podcast listeners who join the Academy. Now let's get to the show.
I think fear comes from uncertainty. And so if you're not sure like how this rental property is going to work, then of course you're going to be fearful. And so I encourage everyone listening, you don't need to pay a bunch of money to join a mastermind, unless it's mine. I would love to have you. You don't have to pay a bunch of money, and don't get so stuck in the weeds. And so like I recommend like find a mentor and just take one step at a time. And then most importantly, just don't buy a bad investment. So make sure that it has multiple exit strategies. You really thought through it. And the first one doesn't have to be a huge home run, is what a lot of people say. But I kindly disagree. I actually think that your first one needs to be a great deal, because otherwise that's where we get a lot of people who say like, I tried real estate investing and it wasn't for me. And it's usually because that first one was a dud.
Ooh, I love the contrarian viewpoint on the first deal. I do think you need it to not suck for sure.
Yes.
And But there is something, I always talk about this dial, right? Of people who spend, they're professional preparers. They take the course,
Mm,
they listen to the podcast, they read the books, but they struggle to take action, whatever action looks like. Sometimes action is just picking a market or like going to the next step in the journey. But
yeah.
ultimately, you have to start submitting offers at some point. You have to start being comfortable, and those offers will eventually lead to a deal if you've followed the sequence correctly. But I think a lot of people, they just like are comfortable in that preparation phase because
Yes.
it's soothing of like, oh, I'm arming myself with information and I'm building the case. But if you never tip the dial to the action lever, then nothing's ever going to happen, right? And so
Well, yeah,
there is a point at which you have
apply
to,
let's
yeah.
apply that to other parts of people's lives. Like, let's think of any of our single friends. So we're both 35. And so we have friends that are like, yeah, I want to get married. We're like, okay, are you going on any dates? Well, I thought about it. Like I thought about, or I've downloaded Hinge and deleted Hinge and downloaded Hinge. It's like, okay, that's not going to result in a successful partnership. Same thing with the gym. Like me thinking about going to the gym and like researching between Orange Theory and Power Life Yoga, like that's not creating any good, healthy physical habits in my life. And so it's the same thing with investing.
Exactly. So I think if, yes, we all want every deal to be a home run, but I think if you got to be conscious of where you sit on that dial. And then on the other side is a bias for action. And sometimes people take action without preparing at all. And so I think there is kind of a sweet spot of like, hey, I've prepared enough that I'm
Mhm.
confident that I have the skills and I have the support network and the things that I need. And now it's time to act. It's always, like you said, people want certainty. You're never going to have 100% certainty in anything you do, real estate or otherwise. So I think it's finding that sweet spot where you feel comfortable enough to take action and you trust yourself that you're going to navigate whatever comes up, because whatever your plan is, there are going to be deviations from it. So at some point you just have to be willing to jump in and weather the storm, right?
Yeah. And I think something that I rarely talk about is what you touched on earlier is I had a really good foundation of personal finance. And so if you're not good at managing a $47,000 salary, you're not going to be good at managing a $400,000 salary. And so I also see a lot of people come to me asking questions about real estate when they have a lot of consumer debt, when they haven't, they're not even taking advantage of like a company match on their retirement plan. And so like a rental property is not going to solve all your problems. It's probably just going to create more problems if you haven't figured those things out. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And so one other lever that I love, you came and did a call on in the mastermind that we're both in, Action Academy, on partnerships. And when we talk about different strategies, especially for people who are busy, right? The deal triangle, you either have time, money, or knowledge. And
Yes.
most people that are working full time don't have a lot of time to spend on real estate. So one of the best ways to unlock that potentially is to find a partner who has time, but maybe they don't have the same resources that the full-time employee has. So you've talked a lot about partnerships. You came in and did a call that really, really resonated with me, where you explained, how you applied the DISC profile, which we'll explain what that is in a second, to try and figure out not only your personal strengths, but how you might interact with other people based on their personalities too. So I know it's a big topic and we don't have a ton of time,
Yeah.
but maybe this is a really fun angle of your skill set and personality that I would love to just hear some of your thoughts on, especially in the context of how busy professionals might be able to leverage partnerships.
Absolutely. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners have worked with managers. Maybe they're even managing people. And so it's really clear at this point that people hear and speak differently. So I might see something as, oh, wow, like Aaron gave me like a really detailed PowerPoint that was so helpful. Or I could say, Aaron gave me a really detailed PowerPoint and it was a huge waste of my time. I wish he would have just got to the point. And that is all about behavior. And so I love the DISC behavioral assessment because it's not about personality. It analyzes about how people behave. And so DISC, it's DISC. And the way that it works is usually people have 1 to 2 dominant letters. So, for example, the C stands for like someone who's really consistent and loves correctness. And the reason that they love correctness is they hate criticism. So think of you want your CPA and your accountant or even your IT person, you want them to be a high C because they're going to make sure every, I is dotted and T's crossed. An S, which is actually about 70% of our population, love steady. They're good teammates. They believe in loyalty, and they love systems. And then a high I is all of the real estate agents that have their face on a bench, your life of the party friend, or I think everybody has that friend that if you're about to buy something, you're like, oh, I'm going to ask Jono. Like, he loves giving recommendations. Like, he's always like the person that's about to give a testimonial. Maybe he has like given the most Google reviews. That tends to be that person. And then a D, which is only 3% of the population, but probably the loudest. These are your very direct, decisive people. Think of like any movie that's had like an angry boss. They're probably a high D. And I speak as a high D, that we're not all like that, but that's that personality. And so why I like this tool, and again, it's just a tool, it's not going to solve all your problems, but I just like this tool because I can identify what someone is and I can speak to their biggest fear as well as their greatest desire. So a high I, their greatest desire is recognition and accomplishments, and their biggest fear is rejection. So they want to know that like this is going to make them look good. If you buy this duplex and when it's cash flowing $600, like your husband is going to be so proud of you that you like made this good financial decision for your family. That would be how I would talk. Whereas if they were a high C, I would say, listen, the, cash on cash return for this duplex is the cap rate in the area is this, like the cost per square footage is this. That would be how I would talk to a high C. And I have been using this tool for, over 12 years. And I think it's made me a really good salesperson. But to your point, it helped me recognize what I was looking for in partners. So my portfolio is made up of 20 units. It's 9 buildings. And 3 of the 9 buildings I own with partners. And I was very clear on the kind of partner that I was looking for. So as a high D, I did not want them to also be a high D. I wanted them to be a high S, maybe a little bit of C, so that we would complement each other well and our communication style would work well. So if you're listening to this and you are that busy professional who doesn't have a lot of time and maybe is really scared or fearful about your first deal, maybe it's a good idea to partner with someone who has experience. You may end up bringing more money to the table and they are what I call the muscle or the on the ground, work. That might be a really good partnership for you. And that's what worked for me is I found someone who had a good salary. They needed to spend less time on the deal than I was willing to do. And so they brought the down payment. I found the deal, managed the renovation, managed the tenants, really manage everything, the bookkeeping, the taxes, everything. And they just get a nice, owner distribution every quarter or, at least an update every quarter. And we split profits, meaning the cash flow. And then eventually we will split the equity in the property.
That's amazing. Yeah. I love using those methodologies and those systems to try and understand not only yourself, but how to communicate with other people who value different things. And communication style and the way that people, like you said, the PowerPoint's a great example. Some people might love just getting all that information because, again, information is soothing to them. It answers questions and it reduces uncertainty and it's polished and it's cool looking. The other person might be like, dude, what's the point? What are you trying to tell me? Just either put it in a sentence or whatever, right? Text it to me. Like, I don't need the fancy presentation. So knowing your audience when you're talking, I think also to investors, right? If you're trying to raise money, trying to understand like who's the type of person I'm talking to. Do
Yes.
they want me to drown them in metrics or do they want to buy into the vision? Like what is it that they care about? Not only qualitatively, but then, what is the return or what is the outcome that they're looking for as a result of this? So just training yourself to think along those lines is valuable in and of itself. And then partnerships can provide, they can fill gaps where you might have them. And they can also potentially, even though you might think to yourself, like we were saying earlier, oh, I'd love to design that house or I'd love to be on the ground and hands-on. Maybe you don't actually love that and you just want to vicariously do that through someone else who actually does. So you can find all that stuff out if you're willing to kind of explore this route. The one thing I want to ask you about partnerships though is so there it can answer a lot of it can solve a lot of problems, answer a lot of questions. It can also create new problems
Yes.
because I always think when people start a partnership, it's easier to gain alignment at the beginning when you're excited about something. But as life goes on and as time passes and as each person's circumstances changes,
Yes.
whether it's life events or jobs or career changes, whatever it is, maintaining that alignment is very difficult. So what are like some of the protections that you would suggest putting in place or whether it's in your own mind or legal or otherwise to kind of manage that journey if you enter into a partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. So the legal side, again, this is not legal advice. I'm not an attorney, but from my own experience, we have a very detailed operating agreement, and we talked about things. One of my partners was engaged at the time, so I wanted to be very clear that I didn't want to be in partnership with her husband. Not, I mean, nothing against him, but I know that if there's too many cooks in the kitchen, that can cause a problem. So we wrote out like what is that going to look like? And then also what in the case of death, what happens if a partner wants to get out? So one of my partners is wanting to pull more, like have more owner distributions than I would want. I'm pretty conservative when it comes to money. And I would like for there to be a pretty good amount of reserves in that property's savings account. And so we have conversations around what do we do in these situations. And a lot of those conversations happen before I even identify a property. And so I'm having conversations with potential partners on what it would look like to partner with me. And it probably looks very different to partner with me. I am looking for a silent partner. So you don't get an opinion on what tenants move in. You don't get an opinion on how I'm going to furnish it if it's a furnished rental. And for my partners, they are like, hallelujah, I am super busy. I have no desire to like do anything related to tenants. Like I just want to own rentals for tax purposes, for the cash flow, for the appreciation. And one of them was kind of toying around with, can I do this on my own? So they wanted to like see behind the curtain. And so I was very, very clear that I wanted a silent partner. Whereas I have a very good friend and he has a partner that they buy rentals together. They're both very involved and they like that. They like chit-chatting about what's going to happen, bounce ideas off of each other. And I'm like, that is not what I was looking for." And so you need to ask yourself before you enter a partnership, what are you really looking for? And it's okay if the answer is, I don't know. At the beginning, at my very first partnership, I had an idea, again, because I look at everything as a business, but I definitely learned a lot from that very first partnership that then dictated how I was going to approach partnerships in the future.
That's amazing. So, very important follow-up question. Where can my listeners find their own Sarah?
Gosh, so many places. You probably work with them. So, if you're willing to be the on the ground, I call it the hustle and the muscle. Your money partner is probably a few cubicles over, or maybe in your past job, think of like one of your favorite people that you worked with. There are so many hidden millionaires out there who have a ton of money sitting around. If that's the partner, if you are the one with the money, then I recommend putting yourself in the room with people who would act as the hustle and the muscle. So these are retreats. My company, Invested Adventures, hosts retreats for real estate investors, and you're going to spend 4 to 10 days either doing a like on the ground workshop, like one of my Nashville retreats, or we're gonna hike Kilimanjaro this summer and go on an African safari. And you really get to know somebody when do something like that together. We're also exploring Japan during the cherry blossom season, eating at Michelin star restaurants all alongside other real estate investors. That's a great way to find your next partner because you see how they handle stressful situations, how they communicate. Do you even like them? And what's their kind of investing strategy? And does it align with what you're doing?
It's such a good point. If you meet somebody for a 30-minute Zoom call and it's specifically about, hey, would we be good partners together and you're learning your style, you can accomplish a lot that way. But when you start breaking bread with people and, staying for multiple days in a row, you see them in the morning, you see them in the evening, you see like what kind of person are they truly. And there's something different that you can learn when you're kind of integrated into a more of a realistic life situation than versus like a more structured like networking environment. And
And
that's,
that's just an equity partnership. So let me be clear that there's also more short-term relationships that you can enter. So one thing I highly recommend people do before they join an equity partners is act as a private money lender. So an example is I'm actually a private money lender on a deal right now. So I'm lending out a set dollar amount for a set amount of time with a set return. And so I'm going to be able to figure out how good of an investor is this person? Do they communicate? Do they give me my money back on time? How do they operate? And then after you lend as a private money lender, then I would, get into conversations about equity partnership, because equity partnerships are likely going to last 3 to 10 years. And so this is not a short-term relationship. So you do want to make sure that you enjoy at least a quarterly Zoom call with this person.
yeah, very important distinction there. Well, I know we're almost out of time, but I would love for you to give an opportunity to talk about your kind of program that you've booted up. What does that look like? And who is your kind of typical person that you serve?
Yeah, so the mentorship program is a year-long program for busy professionals. So I cut out a lot of the noise. Let me give a good example. So Paul joined the program. He is a busy professional in Northern California. He owns 0 rentals and he had the money to invest. And in my program, I gave him the conventional lender, so mortgage lender. I introduced him to the agent. The agent went and found him the deal. I happen to also invest in this town, so I gave him my cleaner, my handyman, my lawn guy. And so Paul would tell you that like he wouldn't have the portfolio that he has right now had he not joined the mentorship program. And I really believe that real estate investing is fantastic because we're not reinventing the wheel. And so it is a proven strategy that does work. I think it's very important that you don't try to do something brand new for the first time without some guidance. And so that's why the mentorship program is there. And so if anyone's interested in joining, I'd love to have a chat with you. Just send me an email or slide into my Instagram DMs. I love helping people like you who know that they want to invest in real estate and they're scared to do it the wrong way. And so I think the cost of the mentorship program is a really good investment. I almost guarantee that you're going to either make that money back through your first deal, or you're definitely going to avoid a mistake that would cost you that much money.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about making an investment in education, mentorship, et cetera. It's not so much, oh, I'm going to make it back from the cash flow, which you can over time, but it's also like, what avoidable mistake can I not make because I got good information from someone who's already done what I'm trying to do. So that's one really good way to think about the value of it. So, well, Sarah, it's been so much fun. I could probably talk for another hour. I have so many other topics I was thinking we would get to, but time just flew on by. I appreciate you coming on the show, and I hope we can do it again sometime soon.
Thanks, Aaron. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for making it to the end of today's episode. As you may know, podcasts are very difficult to grow organically. If you're getting value from today's episode, I'd deeply appreciate if you can take 30 seconds to leave my show a 5-star rating and review. This will go a long way to helping me reach more listeners just like you. Thank you so much in advance.